Welcome and thank you for joining us for the first of our series of virtual events in the light of the Black Lives Matter movement. We're here to discuss race equality in the legal profession, and it's fantastic to see that so many attendees have joined us today. I believe we have over 100, which shows just how important the issue is, but I hope also how seriously the profession is taking it. First, a few bits of housekeeping. Can I just remind you all how this works? It's a virtual meeting, obviously, so please be aware that it's being live streamed and recorded. And please do ask questions. I understand that you can do that by writing in a comment in the comments section, although participants will need to have signed in via Google to be able to take advantage of that, but we look forward to seeing your questions and responding to them. I hope you get involved. So a bit of scene setting before we go to the panel that I have with me. Since our last Black History Month event at the Compliance Conference in October and a round table event in December with law firms and groups such as BSN, an awful lot has changed. So much has changed, more than we could have imagined. And work in the race equality space has, quite rightly, picked up pace. And these events are really just one of the ways that we have of raising awareness and encouraging firms to do more. But of course, this is about far more than events. In our work with firms on race equality, we're told that many want to see further action, and now seems to be the right time to implement measures that really have impact and push the dial. And that's a message that that I've been hearing from lots of firms, big and small, as the context in which we're operating has changed. But important not to get carried away, because we need to remember where we are. So if I could just remind you how things look in the legal sector as we speak. Well, there's some good news. And the good news is that the proportion of Asian lawyers in the profession has increased from 9 to 15% over the past 5 years. And there has been an increase in the proportion of Black lawyers from 2 to 3% over the past 5 years too. But Black and Asian lawyers are both significantly underrepresented in the largest firms. And if you look at data from 1970 to 2016, it shows that a white man has a 75% chance of becoming a partner, whereas for a BAME woman, it's a mere 13%. So now seems like a great opportunity for open and frank discussions, because unless we do that, we are simply not going to make progress. And whatever our role, be it that of regulator, employer, employee, senior partner, or any member of society, and I hope we have some of all of those amongst our audience today, we think that we all have a part to play. So I'm really delighted today to welcome a fantastic panel of guests. I'm just going to introduce them very briefly and then ask them to say a few words themselves to open up the conversation. So first of all, we have Paulette Mastin, who's chair of the Black Solicitors Network, who are celebrating 25 years in this field this year. So many congratulations to all at the BSN. And then we have Sam Smethers, who's the chief executive of the Fawcett Society, who campaign for gender equality, but with a particular focus on intersectionality. And then finally, but definitely not least, we have John Oladeji, who's co-founder of Black Men in Law. And I've asked each of them to open up the conversation by speaking for a few minutes about what they think the biggest issues or priorities are in this space. And I'm going to turn to you, Paulette, to kick us off, please.
Well, thank you very much, Anna and the SRA for inviting me to join this important discussion. I guess if we pivot back to the fact that the organisation that I chair, the Black Solicitors Network, is celebrating 25 years this year. which is quite an achievement. And what exactly have we seen during that period? So in terms of the genesis of the Black Solicitors Network, it was founded 25 years ago by a group of like-minded sole practitioners who shared a vision of a dynamic body that promoted and represented the interests of Black solicitors in England and Wales. Black and minority ethnic solicitors then, as now, were predominantly concentrated in the sort of smaller firms or sole practitioner firms, and a significant number of those were legally aid funded. And they were, and are still, typically located within the heart of the UK's minority communities, giving ordinary people with ordinary problems access to justice. Back then, as now, legal aid has been the target of deficit reduction policies by successive governments. And one of the early successes of BSN, through mobilising like-minded practitioners and lobbying public bodies, was achieving a delay in the introduction of legal aid and legal aid civil contracting, which allowed for firms further time to plan and prepare for legal aid reform. But over the last 20 years, legal aid has been the target of even more stringent reforms and cuts, and has led many such small firms to refocus their business. And BSN, of course, remains supportive of this sector of the profession and continues to provide network supports, particularly during these challenging times. But if we look on a sort of broader level at BSN's mission, it really has evolved from the early days to encompass a sort of medium to large firms, as well, of course, as small firms. And the network embodies a commitment to achieving equality of access, retention, and progression of aspiring and existing solicitors. And we've seen our membership, which is inclusive rather than exclusive, grow exponentially over the 25 years to over 5,000 today, which is compelling evidence, I think, that BSN is as relevant and even more so today than 25 years ago. And sort of tapping into all of that, we have observed, as you've identified, Anna, the underrepresentation of BAME lawyers in city and corporate life. And BSN developed and published the first diversity league table back in 2006, detailing the demographic trends of major law firms, initially in respect of ethnicity and gender. And thereafter, in 2008, the city branch of BSN was formed with the aim of really focusing and addressing the needs of Black corporate and commercial lawyers practicing across the city in Canary Wharf. I would say that both the Diversity League Table and the work of BSN City Group have had a positive impact on access to the profession and how lawyers of BME backgrounds are perceived in the profession and other industries. And I do believe that these initiatives have put to rest the misconception that talented BAME lawyers were not out there or applying to city firms.
Thanks very much, Paula. And just before I move on, is there one thing that you have caused to happen which you think has had the biggest significant impact?
Diversity reporting. When we started the Diversity League Table in 2006, there wasn't a single diversity reporting initiative, and that has changed the game. Fast forward to 2020, and you cannot move for lists. You can't move for league tables. The Law Society, the SRA, as our sort of professional and regulatory body, as well as law firms and other organisations. And I would say that we had a significant role in shifting the dial in terms of understanding what the demographic makeup is across law firms and indeed chambers. And I think that has led to firms really reflecting on their commitment to having a diverse and inclusive workplace.
That's great. Thanks very much, Paulette. So maybe we'll come back to that, and perhaps you might want to say a word about reporting as well, Sam. But over to you. What's your key thoughts?
Thanks very much, Anna, and it's really good to be here with you in this discussion. I think the key thing that I'm sort of reflecting on at the moment is I think we're really just beginning to have a proper conversation about race now. You know, at Fawcett we've been you know, working hard to become an intersectional organisation. You know, the evidence we gather, the research that we do, the recommendations we put into place, you know, the images we use in our campaigning, the partners we work with, our staff, our trustees, it goes through the whole organisation. It's about our values, it's about how we want to work, and it's also about who we want to be relevant to. You know, do we want to talk about some of the population, or do we want to be relevant to everyone in the population? And that means we have to take an intersectional approach. But I do think the conversation about race has shifted a gear, and it's absolutely been necessary and essential for it to do so. But it makes you realise just how far behind we've been actually on that question. Yeah, there's a report out today on called The Colour of Power, which has been published by Operation Black Votes and Green Park, and it shows really starkly just how few positions of power are held by Black, Asian or minority ethnic people in this country. And when we did our Sex and Power report in January, we published similar data but through a gender lens, showing that too. So, you know, I think it feels like we've sped up the journey a bit, and that's good, but I think we have to get through a period of discomfort for white dominated organisations actually, and people have to be open to having difficult conversations, stop being defensive in those conversations, really reflect on how they need to educate themselves and learn to be a better organisation and a better employer, and you know, and be open to change. And I think some people will be ready for that and up for that, and others won't be, and it's going to be difficult territory, but we absolutely have to do it and go through it, you know. And you know, we're working not just in the legal profession but throughout society. This is going to be going everywhere now, to really kind of drive this change. And the role that organisations like mine can play is to really integrate within our core narrative and our core work, you know, the evidence and the solutions and the visibility of Black, Asian and minority ethnic women, primarily because we're a sex-focused charity, sex discrimination charity. And when we're talking about institutional sexism and structural inequality for women, we're also talking about institutionalised racism and structural inequality for Black, Asian and minority ethnic people as well, which means that's the world we're in, that's the default we're working with, and we have to try and actively counter it if we want to move forward. Otherwise, the risk is we just step backwards. So that's probably all I want to say at the moment. We'll come into the rest of the conversation and hopefully say a bit more as we go through. But you know, I really welcome this conversation. I really hope it's the start of really significant change, not only for the legal profession but for, you know, our entire society and economy, so we can actually see some progress on what are persistent structural inequalities.
Thanks very much, Sam. And if I may, just one question following up from that. And given your experience as an organisation of sort of creating that level of discomfort in organisations in relation to women, what's the kind of learning point? How does one create a level of discomfort which causes self-reflection and review?
Well, I think the point that Paulette was making about reporting actually is very well made. I think gender pay gap reporting has been a useful tool to focus employers' minds on what's going on within their own organisations. It's currently suspended though, so we've got to work to get that back because it was paused for COVID. And I know there's lots of talk about ethnicity pay gap reporting, which we support and we welcome, but it has to be done properly and well. So I think holding people to account, but in a way that actually enables them to learn and to progress. You know, the problem we encounter with discussions about sexism and racism is a defensive mindset which isn't ready to learn, and then you end up in a place where you can't progress because, you know, there might be a tokenistic gesture made to say, well, don't worry, we're doing that thing over there, so we're not sexist, are we, or we're not racist, are we? And actually they're not really engaging in what's meaningful change. And so we've got to have the requirement, have the accountability in place, but also bring people with us in terms of education and change.
Thanks very much. So turning to you, John, your opening thoughts, please.
Yes, first and foremost, thank you very much for allowing us to be a part of this conversation. I think it's really important, and I think we all appreciate that, you know, times have called for these conversations to come to the forefront, whether uncomfortable or not comfortable. It's things going on in society now necessitate that we have these types of conversations. And as Sam has alluded to, it's important for us as sort of custodians of the legal profession, those of us involved in the legal profession, to bring these conversations to the forefront. But it's also important for us to have these conversations so our clients as well can, different sectors, different industries, different professions will have sort of different challenges that they all face. The same challenges that we face as lawyers won't necessarily be the same challenges that our clients in consultancy and banking may face. But us having these kind of conversations and allowing them to hear the challenges that we're experiencing and the things that we're trying to implement in order to bring things forward, there are lessons that can be learned all across the platform. So I think these kind of conversations are very important. And as the Black Men in Law Network, the initiative was started so that we could have these conversations. Although we do represent mostly the Black male interest, we do support, initiatives that drive the whole conversation forward, whether that's for Black women or people from other BAME networks and other BAME backgrounds. So, I mean, for me, I'm by no means an expert on the subject matter, but I think, as a sort of younger member of the panel, in sort of the early stages of my career, I can kind of shed light from a kind of different perspective and kind of help to drive the conversation forward and help to navigate that from a different angle. So really looking forward to sharing some knowledge and also learning from Paula and Sam and yourself, Anna.
Thanks very much. Well, I'm going to see if we can learn a bit from you to start with, though, and just ask you a question about sort of what it was that drove you to speak about perhaps your own experience or the experience of some of your those of you who set up the organisation, to tell us what were the sorts of experiences which drove you to want to bring the network together and give people support. Could you give us a flavour for that?
Yes. So the initiative was born. It's just over 2 years old now. It started by myself and a current training solicitor called Isaac Eloy, who trains at Briefs National Law Firm. And the kind of impetus behind it was, personally for myself, I was a training solicitor at the time. And, quite quickly I realized that on most of my training contract rotations, I was more or less often the only Black fee earner on the team, on the floor. And what that meant was that I was quite observant. So I may be walking past the room and I may see 3 fee earners, from partner, associate and trainee level, all from the same or similar background. And there was one particular moment which I kind of stepped back and started to think to myself, how powerful that must be as an experience. Of course, I enjoy working with colleagues from all different backgrounds. Doesn't necessarily have to be the case that you're from the same background or same ethnic background, but there's a sort of a powerful experience that comes from that, especially from a junior level, looking, to midway up and then all the way up to partnership level and seeing real visual representation, and that kind of acts as a push towards actually thinking to yourself, no, actually, well, if I, do the work to the best of my ability, then I can see that I can progress, 3-4 years from now to the mid-senior solicitor level, and then from there, there's a pathway for me to partnership. But what happens from a junior lawyer's perspective is you often see that there's a drop-off rate after the 3-5 year PQE mark, where you start to see less people that resemble yourselves, especially as a Black male solicitor. As training at the time, I realized that I could quite easily call upon Black female solicitors, associates and partners, but as Black men, we started to kind of understand that actually there's an emotional burden that women in general in the workplace would carry, and we felt that it was bestowed on us to ensure that we weren't adding additional stress and additional weight to that already existing pressure, but actually trying to find male role models within the profession that would have had similar experiences to ourselves. And as I say that, men and women experience working environments and life in different ways. There are similarities, but there are some experiences that women will have that women will be best placed to kind of advise and help and assist on, and there'll be experiences that men will be best placed to help and advise and assist on. So we felt that, you know, it was a time for us to change the narrative. Far too often, you know, many of us in the organisation had called upon the likes of Paulette and other senior solicitors within the profession, and we just felt that we needed to kind of change that conversation, and also to provide the younger generation, so those younger students coming through, with actual physical, tangible role models to look forward to. So, you know, making ourselves more known within the profession and actually having a body that people could look towards. And since, you know, the growth has been very outstanding, the reception has been overwhelming. You know, recently we had an event on police powers, stop and search, and, you know, quite quickly we went from initially planning to have 100 people join the webinar to over 500 people subscribing. So goes to show that kind of the efforts and the things that we're putting in, definitely being well received. And so that was kind of our main reason for starting.
So, thanks very much. So central to that is the notion of role models, Paula, and we know from all our experience around diversity that that senior leadership, visible senior leadership, is you know, absolutely critically important. So I just wonder if you could talk a bit about how we might get to a place where those senior role models and senior leadership are sort of much more evident in the profession overall.
I think that you have to go way back to the metrics. So there are two things at play here: understanding the metrics, where the gaps are, and also the culture, organisational culture. So if we look at the stats, so of course I mentioned before that the Black Solicitors Network has been publishing the Diversity League Table for over 10 years now, and you know what we've observed, and that looks at diversity across the core strands, not just race and ethnicity. It's also looked at LGBTQ, social mobility, gender. But what we've observed, just focusing on race and ethnicity over this period, is that, and I think you touched on this, Anna, is that the proportion of BAME individuals entering the profession has almost doubled in 10 years. Say if we look at the period that we've covered consistently, 2006 to 2016, doubled from 10% to 20%. You could almost, I would go so far as to say that that's commendable. Because you're looking at a profession that is more representative than, you know, if you look at the composition of the population, looking at the proportion that's BAME from the census. But what our studies reveal is that the attrition levels for BAME lawyers, particularly in the step up from trainee to associate, is higher than for any other group. And a further revelation is that the levels of attrition of BAME lawyers, and I think you touched on this, as we move up the professional ladder, those stats, the attrition levels, are worryingly high and mean that only 8% of partners are from BAME backgrounds. It's up from 3% in 2006. And those of African and African Caribbean origin comprise just 1% of partners in large firms. So the challenge here is that we have a massively leaky pipeline, which leads to a dearth or a gap of BAME senior leaders. So in terms of what I would expect from firms, or what I would hope to see firms focusing on going forward, is really analysing why there is such a high attrition rate from the step up from trainee to associate, and indeed from associate to counsel and partnership. And I believe that there is merit in firms looking at initiatives and measures, and this is from senior, this is showing leadership because it needs to come from the top, and it also needs to be owned by the middle. That address this persistent issue at the early and mid-level phase of the career trajectory. So whether that's enabling and ensuring equality of access to stretch and high-profile assignments, equality of access to client opportunities, secondments, mentoring, coaching programs, and the all-important sponsorship support into senior roles. This is a step towards building the pipeline of talent for promotion to senior roles within the organisation, rather than what we're seeing, which is a hemorrhaging of BAME talent, and in particular black talent, in the early to mid levels of their career trajectory.
Thanks very much. So that kind of wants me to go in two different directions, and perhaps we'll pick up both. But one is the fact that, in a way, what you're describing, Paulette, is something very much about the systemic racism that exists, because lots of people in firms wouldn't recognise the obstacles that are obviously causing those issues there must be obstacles that are causing those problems to arise. And then the second thing that it makes me think about is that that in a world where we perhaps don't have enough, we don't have enough senior leaders from the BAME community, makes me want to ask the question about what I think are described by you, Sam, as white allies. And I wonder if you might like to reflect on perhaps both of those things, please.
Thanks, Anna. I think just taking a point about the profession and also following up on Paulette's comments, because I think all of the steps she was outlining are really sensible interventions that can be made to address that leaky pipeline. And there's a question in the chat that I noticed, which is about some firms not wanting to sign up to and make a commitment about Black Lives Matter because they see it as too political. And I think that speaks to what I was saying before about being in a defensive place and feeling that somehow it's a political movement out there and it's not really relevant to how we run an organisation in here, and we're not racist, are we? So we don't need to make a commitment to Black Lives Matter because there's no connection. They're not seeing the connection, and there is a connection. There's a very clear connection, because it's about visibility and progress and values and culture and practices. And if your visibility shows that actually you've got a very white dominated organisation, just as you will probably have a male dominated organisation, and if you've got that attrition rate that Paulette was setting out, then that tells you something's going wrong in the organisation. So you have to be open to learning and to looking at why that's happening. And the connection between values and culture and practice is, do you have those values, inclusion and diversity set out clearly within your core values? Are you living those values? Is it represented in the actions you take? Can people see that's what you're about because of the way you do your work and the way you run your organisation? And how are you running, the practices of recruitment, progression, and so on? So it does require a level of reflection and transparency and self-awareness and organisational awareness and a bit of humility, to be honest. And so I think it's really disappointing if some firms are not making a statement of solidarity at this point. There's a real opportunity, I think, for them to do so. And the point about allyship that you were asking about, Anna, is I think, what's my job as a white woman at this point in time, this moment in history? What should I be doing? And I think it's to use my power that I have running Fawcett, in the little world that I'm in, to help to be part of an anti-racist movement. So I think I have to be anti-racist within my organisation. I have to be anti-racist externally in the way that I promote the core mission and vision and values of the organisation, the work that we do. And I have to think about how the actions I'm taking ally with and support Black, Asian and minority ethnic allies, and a lot of them are the women that we work with, and the men, to be part of that movement and to make space for that and to ensure that can succeed, because we want to live in an anti-racist society, don't we? That ultimately is where we want to be, and we want racism to be something that we can put behind us, not something that we're constantly living with and replicating because we're not aware enough and we're not educated enough. So allyship is really fundamentally important, and power is important. And so thinking about, again, who the gatekeepers are and who the power holders are within organisations and within the legal profession, actually those partners, those senior people have got huge power and can make real difference if they choose to make way for someone else, to open the door to someone else, to change the practice, to promote others, to actually accelerate change and improve the representation of BAME people within the profession. So it's about how you use your power and being open to change. And standing really in solidarity with what is, I think, a movement that is not only grown but is going to be here to stay. So we've got to keep having this conversation and we've got to keep making progress.
So Paulette, can I come back to you, because that suggests, and I'm sure this is right, that we want and need the very many more white partners that there are to play a really significant part in sponsoring and helping to lead a change in these firms. But there's a balance to be struck there, isn't there, between those people leading the charge and then creating space for their BAME colleagues to help shape and develop what happens inside a firm. So is there, can you point to any really great examples where law firms have got this right, or where the thinking about what they want to do feels constructive?
I guess there are a number of points in there. I share Sam's view around the importance of white allies. Because let's face it, there are a few of us in the room, there are a few of us at the table, and unless we have those who are invested in our progress in the room and at the table, advocating actively for us, understanding the narrative, which is why these courageous conversations are so important, it will be a very difficult journey to achieve equity and equality at the top. So I think allyship is extremely important. I think the allies who self-elect to be allies or are nominated to be allies really do need to have a commitment to understanding the lived experience of someone from BAME backgrounds, and understanding the components of BAME as well, because the experiences are different and unique. D&I teaches us that not everyone will experience things in the same way. So it is an education on both sides. And so a couple of observations, I think, Anna, you wanted me to highlight, where there has been sort of visible leadership on promoting race. And some good examples. Well, of course, I have to mention my firm, which is Linklaters, and so I start with them. So I would be the first to admit that we do have some way to go on racial diversity at the mid and senior levels. So that's in the interest of full disclosure there, and that's perhaps a story for similar firms. But the important first step is taking ownership. So the firm's senior partner, who's Charlie Jacobs, is also the firm's senior champion for race and ethnicity. And he stands behind, he sponsors and socializes internally initiatives that support and accelerate BAME talent. So one example is a couple of years ago, the firm developed and launched a BAME talent accelerator program called Inspire. And a unique feature, it was the program was developed with external experts, as well as, importantly, in consultation with our BAME network. So there were consultations over a sustained period of time to understand the lived experience of BAME individuals at the firm, not just fee earners, but also those in business services. And it was a bespoke program designed for our firm, for our people. And a unique feature of this program is that it brings together participants with their line managers and partners. So you join the program as a BAME talent, together with your line manager or partner or counsel senior associate. And that enables dialogue across demographic differences. And participants then have the opportunity to challenge leadership practice and learn new techniques to achieve high quality feedback and to progress their careers. And the program isn't about fixing the BAME population or providing some kind of remedial action. Instead, it's designed to be a career enabler and accelerator of BAME talent. That's one example. Another recent example of visible leadership around racial diversity was what I observed actually last week. So Segun Osuntoken, who is the managing partner of Brian Cave Leighton Paisner, wrote an open letter in the context of the Black Lives Matter movement that was published in The Lawyer. And my own observation is that I really respect his honesty around the need to scrutinise the inclusivity of his firm and to stand up and demand real sustainable change on racial diversity. So Segun has played, as I understand it, quite an active role in the genesis of the UK Race Fairness Commitment, which is akin to a charter which was launched by Rare Recruitment recently. And the firm that I work for, Linklaters, has also signed up to it. The charter includes new data-driven measures on taking structural action on race in the workplace with a real focus on retention of BAME lawyers. And the firms that sign up to join the commitment intend to publish a sort of far broader set of diversity data than they have in the past. And that really sort of opens them up to scrutiny and accountability, which then sort of is self-perpetuating, should lead to action. And I would say that these are sort of genuine efforts towards dismantling some of the sort of structural issues around race and ethnicity in the workplace.
That's really helpful, Paulette. And kind of going to that lived experience directly, John, and to your experience and that of your colleagues in the network. Are there any particular examples of really good practice that you could point to where you have felt really well engaged in these processes inside a firm?
Definitely. So during my time as a trainee, I was also the co-head of a multicultural network, which was basically put together to address these kind of situations and to work hand in hand with the graduate recruitment team. So some of the initiatives that we came up with was to partner with clients and organizations such as Urban Lawyers. And off the back of that alone, I believe the firm was able to obtain, I think it was 3 future trainees from that network. So that was a kind of direct result of what can happen when efforts are focused. And I kind of give it to the analogy of, you know, in any kind of sports team, you know, after the year ends, you'll reflect on performance during the year. You will identify things that went well, things that can be further improved, positions that need to be improved. And I think law firms kind of need to use that kind of way of reviewing and reflecting on themselves, in that when we, as we all mentioned, you know, in the early stages, so retention now, as I see it, is fantastic across the board. More or less, a lot of firms are getting applications from a diverse pool of talent, diverse backgrounds, different universities, and they're able to bring those applicants into the firm. Now, the issue is what happens to them after the 2-year training contract process. Why is it that less BAME trainees stay on or move firms? And then we're looking down to 3-5 years down the line, what happens there again? So I think it's, you know, having concerted effort and focused initiatives. So at the time when I was at this firm, it was to try and get more applicants from particularly the Black background. So what happened was that we had an event focused specifically on bringing in applicants from that background that may not have otherwise applied to the firm. And from that, there was a direct result, a positive result, in that they gained more applicants and actually successful applicants that are now trainees and future trainees at the firm. And I think it's that kind of approach that needs to be taken throughout the entire pipeline from training all the way to partnership. I think if we continue to group all these issues together and have, initiatives that try to help, large groups of people at a time, we're going to see that not enough people are actually aided and progress. But what we need to do is focus efforts on, smaller scale initiatives that are replicated throughout the course of the year on a larger scale. So I think with that kind of focus and effort, then we'll start to see, greater results. So we've spoken about mentorship and sponsorship. How often do these things actually happen within firms? Is it a case of, obviously, we have to factor in that partners and senior lawyers have to also, focus on fee work and fee ownership work. So is it the case that we need more hands-on approach where, there are a greater number of volunteers involved so that, a larger pool of candidates can be assisted? Because, if it is the case that you only have 5 or 6 partners that are involved in these kind of initiatives, then, balancing just the day job, as we all know, is quite demanding in and of itself. And, just life in and of itself can mean that these kind of initiatives don't get the full support and attention that they need.
That's great. And I think so we've had a question from someone in the audience about the fact that people often say, when we talk about equality, any type of equality actually, things like, well, we want the best people and we want to be fair to all, so we can't take any special measures. And actually I think you've just given a great example there of how the point is to take special measures which get people into the room and make sure that when they get to the room, they've got the skills and confidence and support to be able to give of their best, so that they are then able to be judged against their peers and hopefully given new opportunities. But it's the absence of that extra support to get people into the room and make them well prepared that often is the problem. And I think the questioner was asking, so what should the response be? And I think you've kind of given us the answer there. Is that fair?
Yeah, definitely. I feel that, in terms of making things an equal level playing field, because, if we look at let's say 20 trainees come into a law firm, for many reasons, 2 years down the line, someone may decide to go to in-house or whatever the case is. There are many things that happen in people's lives that, redirect the courses of their careers. But if time and time again, the statistics show that when we hit the 2 and 5 year PQE mark, there's a high attrition rate of lawyers from the BAME background, then from there we can identify that from traineeship up until that point, there's something that hasn't necessarily gone right for that specific demographic of lawyers, and it's from that we need to identify things that can be done to kind of change that narrative. So I wouldn't say it's not trying to give anyone else the upper hand. It's identifying that during this period of time something hasn't necessarily gone right, and it's about addressing that so that when it does come to putting applicants forward for the sponsorship and mentoring that Paulette spoke about at the latter end of the kind of junior career up into partnership, that all of those candidates are in the best possible position to make the most of those opportunities.
Thank you. Another question that we've had, and it's a really broad question, so but perhaps you'd like to have a go at it, is what does it mean to be anti-racist? And I think, Sam, you spoke about anti-racism and wanting to live in an anti-racist society. So I wonder if I could come to you. What does being anti-racist mean to you?
Well, for me, it means proactively challenging racism and being confident in spotting the different ways it manifests itself. So if you're in a situation where you're alongside a black colleague or an Asian colleague, and they're in a conversation with maybe a senior white colleague, and there's a dynamic in that conversation, or there's a particular way of behaviour, particular codes of behaviour, if you like, that are manifesting themselves, your BAME colleagues will probably know exactly what's going on, and they'll spot the racism, they'll feel it, they'll experience it. But you, as a white person in that room, may not. You're just not attuned to it. You're not aware enough. So it's being in a place where you can actually see what's going on. So proactively spotting some of those sort of microaggressions and the not overtly racist stuff. It's the covert stuff, actually, which often can be the most damaging, and can be allowed to persist because we're not good at spotting it. We're not good at surfacing it and voicing it when it's there and challenging it. So giving people the tools and the confidence to do that, and also that sense of responsibility and ownership over it, to say actually we do have to call those things out and we do have to challenge those things. It's not easy. I'm not saying it's an easy thing to do, but actually I think we've kind of been at a place where we've focused on measures that can be non-racist, and so to say we don't discriminate in recruitment or we don't discriminate in the way we promote people, and actually it's shifting into a more proactive place to say we're going to really call out those moments when we're seeing that behaviour manifest itself, or sometimes calling in, so challenging people, but in a way that actually keeps them in the conversation, helps them reflect on what they've just done and think about, well, perhaps they should have said something in a different way, or perhaps should have thought about what the impact of using a particular phrase might have been on others in the room. So for me, I think that's where it's going. I think we have to be in that anti-racist space if we really want to move things on.
So that's partly about putting yourself in the shoes of someone from the BAME community, so you feel, or you try to feel, what's being said in the same way that they might experience it, and partly about taking responsibility and being proactive. Is that right?
But you can never feel it in the same way because you're not on the receiving end. But what I'm saying is it's being attuned enough and aware enough to understand what's going on, rather than just it goes over your head and you just don't spot it.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Paulette. Does that match your thoughts? Do you want to add something to that?
Yeah. So living the experience of receiving or being on the receiving end of racist behaviour or comments, someone who is actively anti-racist would be the one who recognises, because a lot of the times when people are being anti-racist, others in the room know that the anti-racism is being perpetuated, right? So it really is not necessarily being brave, but certainly recognising it for what it is. If you are non-BAME, anti-racist behaviour involves, as Sam has highlighted, calling that out, taking the individual to task, taking responsibility in the moment, being non-racist, I'm not a racist, just means you don't go around saying racist things and behaving in a racist manner. And the thing about non-racists is that they'll recognise the racist behaviour, and they might even go away and have a conversation with someone about it. Oh, that was awful. Yeah, it was really awful. Yeah, I know I should have done something. But anyway, moments passed. And those are it sounds like a subtlety, but for us, it's a sort of every day, every other day, or every other week type experience. So active anti-racists in the moment will call out those microaggressions, will call out the racist behaviour for what it is, and by so doing, that then leads to more positive and socially acceptable behaviour from others.
Thanks very much. So I want to move to some of the reasons, in a way, why we're having this conversation right at this moment, because it's really clear that all the data is pointing to the fact that this world we're living in right now, the COVID-19 world, is weighing very heavily on the BAME community, both in terms of the impact of the disease and also in terms of the socioeconomic impact on sectors of the community, and of course, hotly following that, and sort of adding to the issues which people are having to address, has been the Black Lives, the resurgence, the real sort of strong sense of Black Lives Matter following events initially in the States. And that has clearly been, I mean, taking those two together, really difficult for lots of people to process and respond to. And yet I understand it's come at a time when, of course, the best of firms are also wanting to think about those issues themselves, and then perhaps putting increasing demands on members of the BAME community to try and do what might be appropriate. And I wondered if you could just kind of give a bit of exposure to that, Paulette, for me, and tell us a bit about how it feels, and perhaps we'll move on to what we can all do to help in that situation.
Sorry. Thanks, Anna. So I would say that the tragedy of George Floyd's murder at the hands of those who are meant to protect and to serve, and the outpouring that followed right across the world, and you know, the movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, altogether has weighed quite heavily on a number of people of colour, certainly from our community, and the courageous conversations that have followed from that are encouraging. But I think what's important is that we cannot underestimate the traumatic and profound impact that this incident and the outpouring from it, and years of racial inequalities on you know, the impact that is having on Black lawyers and Black employees, on their well-being. And one of the things that you know, we would expect to see, and some firms have done really well, is the sort of reaching out and connecting with their Black colleagues, checking in, just really understanding that in that moment. And you might say, well, you know, there have been so many killings of Black men and women in the US at the hands of police. Why this time? Why now? Why is it so profound now? And you know, essentially it's because it was filmed. The entire process was filmed. It was streamed across the world. The reaction, the nonchalance of the police officers around what was happening with this young man just really struck such a nerve and such a chord that it just brought back all of those inequalities that individuals, our parents and our grandparents have suffered over many, many years. And that has impacted on our well-being. And it has meant that, you know, a lot of us haven't been okay. So the checking in and, you know, being that sort of supportive force as part of leadership of our organisation has been so important. You know, be that listening ear, be supportive, you know, because many of us haven't actually been okay. That's one aspect. So that sort of speaks to the whole sort of mental health and well-being impact of this event and the resulting Black Lives Matter movement. And I would also say that what people of colour find exhausting is the digging into of our sort of painful elements of our past, you know, around sort of inequalities, experiences and so on, and displaying that for, you know, the education of everybody else. That in and of itself takes its toll. I think it was referred to as sort of like a cultural taxation Of course, for us, those of us who are in sort of leadership positions, it is incumbent upon us to have some kind of social responsibility around spreading the word about the importance of racial diversity, and the fact that it is now time for change. Now that we're all waking up to these disparities, these inequalities, let's really just work together to try and drive change. But yes, as I mentioned before, you can't underestimate the impact that this is having on the mental health and well-being of people of colour.
And perhaps I can turn to you, John, and ask, because this is part of the purpose of your network, is that sort of mutual support and conversation. It must have been a time when, well, hopefully the network really came into its own. How has it changed the way the network has been working?
Yes, definitely. I think for all of us, especially as black men, it really sent shockwaves through the system. Personally, I was very emotional watching the whole thing unfold on the internet as well. And I mean, for us as the Black Men in Laws Network, we put out a personal statement of our views and thoughts and what we actually thought about the whole situation. And quite often, I think it's easy to kind of say it's kind of a US issue. It happens mostly in the US. But I think as we pause, the opportunity that COVID-19 has given us, we have to look at the fortunate things that happen in these kind of situations. Is that it's forced the entire world to kind of pause and be at a standstill, where things that usually happen. So the murder of George Floyd isn't a new thing, but because it happened at a time where the world was essentially paused, and at a time especially where there's a disease that has disproportionately affected people from the BAME community as well, but to see that these things were still happening despite the world being essentially on a lockdown, I think it was too brutal for anyone not to actually sit down and recognize that there is an issue and things need to change. So I feel that the resurgence of the BLM movement, in part, it feels like a very powerful resurgence because the world has been forced to stand still. And personally, I think that's an excellent thing. It's an excellent opportunity for us to make real progress. But for us, I know one of the statistics that's come out recently through the whole COVID-19 situation, as everyone knows, police have been given additional powers. And, I think it was 2 weeks ago now that they reported that 22,000 young black males were stopped and searched in the capital, which is an astounding figure. And, series videos have been released online of, young black men being stopped and searched for whatever reason. And us as the Black Men in Law community, we decided that, being the custodians of the legal profession and having, an amount of knowledge that others may not be able to freely access or understand, it was bestowed on us to run an event to actually address this particular issue and equip young black men who, are likely to be stopped and searched during lockdown and post-lockdown, to give them the knowledge that they can actually use in these circumstances. So for us, the whole situation has, really kind of shocked us to the core and kind of, demonstrated to us that more now than ever, we really need to, really give more back to the community, especially those that will be impacted more than others.
So that's really helpful, and I think points to two things which we might want particularly to look to firms to be, law firms to be doing in this context. So one being this emphasis that you've given, Paula, on health and well-being support and the reaching out to people and so on. I think the other you've pointed to, John, is the recognition that as lawyers, there are things that the profession can do through small things and big things to support the wider BAME community in relation to moving things forward, and this kind of spotlight that is currently on the issue, in particular groups who have issues. as you've illustrated, young black men and stop and search. But I wonder, is there anything else we should add to that list that we should be asking firms to do? Sam, do you anything you might think we ought to be asking firms to do in this context?
Well, I think it's really important for firms to listen to their black staff and their minority ethnic staff, and particularly in the context of Black Lives Matter. I mean, when George Floyd's murder happened, and it was then a question of, well, how do we respond to that as an organisation? I think the first thing we did was also ask our BAME members of staff and just see what they wanted us to do. What did they want from us? Because it's easy to sort of presume and actually you don't always know what the right thing is, and it's important to listen to people. And then, for people to feel heard and that they've got some power and control over what's happening within their own organisation as well. So that's, creating that space for that is important. But I think the key thing is, this is, as I said at the beginning, this is the beginning of a conversation. This is not, a short-term thing. This is going to go on and grow. So it's about, what's your strategy going to be going forward? How are you going to continue to progress, an anti-racist policy within your organisation? Or it isn't just about how you respond in this moment, although this moment is very, very important. It's how do you use this moment to pivot into something that's actually going to be proactively moving you forward and moving this issue forward, so that you become a more inclusive, diverse organisation that does promote black people to the top of the organisation and so on. So how do you move forward? So that's where I would start from, really.
Another very good point. Unless anyone's got anything else to add on this particular topic, I'm sure we could talk about it for the rest of the afternoon. But sort of moving to the question of how we really move things forward in legal services. If you had sort of one or two things that you could put on the wish list, what would they be? And perhaps I can start with you, Paulette, again. What would your two takeouts that you'd want to leave everyone on this call with? What we must do is.
Yeah. So the first one is threefold: metrics, targets, and accountability. That's how I started, so I'll finish. Really important. Understand the makeup of your organisation, from a demographics perspective. Anna, you've already pointed out that black lawyers make up 3% of the legal profession. What proportion of your legal staff is represented by black lawyers? Understand that. And then implement systems and processes that actually measure and monitor the diversity through the career life cycle. So recruitment, retention, promotion, exit interviews, really important. Ethnicity pay gap reporting, definitely key. And we've talked extensively about retention and progression. Organisational culture, really important. As I've said, there are issues flowing from the George Floyd and Black Lives Matter events. But I think that it's critical that law firms ensure that there's a level playing field in terms of equality of opportunity and advancement, and implement those tools that I mentioned previously, and that ensures accountability, which goes back to the original point. Social responsibility, corporate social responsibility, very important. Really supporting talent coming through, whether it's working with local schools to provide insights on life of a lawyer, and when I say local schools, I mean local state schools. Raise the aspirations and employability by providing work experience opportunities for black pupils. look at bursaries, scholarship programs to support the pipeline of black candidates coming through, pro bono initiatives. There's a real issue about access to justice. John has touched on this, and there are organisations that support particularly underrepresented racial groups receiving sort of more access to justice. And of course, join the Black Solicitors Network. We have extensive corporate membership as well as individual membership. I'll stop there.
That's fantastic. Thanks very much. John, what would be your wish list items?
Yes, I think Paula's list was very well-rounded and versed, and included many of the things that I would have mentioned. But personally, like, as a co-founder of the Black Women in Laws Network, so we've had the opportunity of working with a number of firms. I know we regularly host our emotional well-being webinar at Linklaters, who have served us in the past, and we hope to continue that relationship. We've also worked with White & Case, who are our premier sponsor, and have helped us to host events for younger students and current members as well. I think for us, kind of now, as we kind of get back into some sort of normality in terms of being able to go back into the office and those sorts of things, we hope that will, law firms will start to, consider things from a practical level. So, for instance, now, starting to think about which organizations can we actually start to partner with in terms of going into schools, what organizations are out there that can help us to kind of come into our firms and discuss more of our employees from a BAME background. So from our perspective at the Black Men in Law Network, we're always open to working with all different firms, international firms, national firms, small, medium and large firms. We just kind of call upon them to tap into our network. We're more than willing and happy to kind of come in and share knowledge and help build, whether it's firms that may not have BAME initiatives and may need some of us within the network who, at our individual law firms, we have co-founded or currently run diversity networks and have knowledge and expertise that we can use to others, but also kind of drawing on, presenting the kind of younger view of how things are progressing and listening more to the younger stakeholders, because at the end of the day, the future partners and the future council members are the current trainees and are the current junior lawyers, and just really spending time and listening to them and understanding what they feel needs to change in their organization to progress things forward. I think that's really, really important.
Yeah, and that reaching out to youth in the profession is I think something we need to do in very many respects in relation to the BAME community, but actually to the whole of the profession, because there's always a real danger that I'm going to say this as an older woman, but that all the sorts of decisions get made by people who are significantly older, for whom the world feels quite different, and that cannot be a good thing for our future. Sam, what would you have on your wish list?
Gosh, there's so many great things that would have been said, but I suppose thinking about it from the sort of white allies perspective, in terms of what can managers and leaders and colleagues within organisations do. I think the key thing is to ensure that you don't have that defensive culture, that you're open to learning, you're open to accepting that actually just as sexist behaviour is imported into workplaces, so too is racist behaviour. If that's the default world we're in, and that's what we're living in, that's the culture that is also bringing into our organisations every day. So you have to actively and proactively challenge that. You have to check it and recognise it. And just being open to that. It doesn't mean, therefore, you are personally a racist, and you get very kind of defensive reactions when people ever talk about racism, because that's where they go to immediately. You have to step back from that and think, this is how we're going to learn and improve our organisation. And actually, again, back to that point in the chat about how do we get the best people for the job. This is how we get the best people for the job. Actually, it's about removing barriers, challenging discrimination, ensuring that people can thrive and progress no matter what their gender, what their ethnicity, and so on. So we absolutely, if we want to have the best organisations with the best performance and the best decision making, we have to have diversity and inclusion right throughout the organisation. So yeah, try to have that conversation in a non-defensive way, be open to learning, and then you can start to really progress.
So I mean, what that says to me, because we've had metrics, targets and accountability, we've had corporate social responsibility, we've had rebalancing the power within organisations and giving more space to the younger voice, we've had culture and proactive challenge. I mean, what that put that all together, and actually it's a sea change, isn't it, for the way that we operate in legal services, which is going to make it very, very challenging to achieve, because there is no simple sort of answer. But I think, as you've all said, now is a moment when we must take advantage of the will and the desire to do, recognition of the fact that we aren't doing as well as we are, and desire to do significantly better. And I think what the panel have all made really clear, and this is hugely important for everyone listening and for people like myself, is that it's everyone's responsibility. And as I think I can't remember whether it was Sam or Paulette, or maybe both, were saying, not enough to say you're anti-racist and then walk out of the room, you said, Paulette, and then say to someone else, oh, that was bad, wasn't it? But rather to address it when you hear it. And actually, many of us are not, or many people are not very good at that, calling it out when something happens. And perhaps we need to help people to learn the tools to be able to do that more, because it's not always an easy thing to do, but a hugely important one. It's those little moments, isn't it? Not just the big ones, which you need to call out. So I think some absolutely fantastic insights from everyone, and I want to thank you all three for your contributions, for bringing your experience and knowledge to the conversation. Really great. I want to thank all of those who've been listening and watching. I really hope that you found it as interesting as I have, and that you've got something to take away and think about, and hopefully do in your daily lives. We will be following up today by inviting those people who've participated to give us some feedback. So please do that, because we can always get better, and it's very important to know what you thought of today. But what I'm going to sort of just end with is a reminder that we have a lot of resources in this space already, in addition to those that people like the Black Solicitors Network and other organisations have. But we have a lot of resources on our website, and we're really keen to try and continue to develop those in ways that will be helpful. But again, we can only do that if you tell us what would be useful, most useful, and then we'll be happy to work with you, with whoever has made those suggestions and others, to develop those initiatives and turn them into new and hopefully even more useful resources. So take a look at the website, see if what you want as a result of this conversation is there, and if not, please do tell us. And as John was saying, take advantage in the best possible way of the organisations that already exist, which such as those present, who can give advice and support of various different sorts. So thank you very much to everyone again, and wish you a very good afternoon. Thank you.